Welcome to the Manzil Ahmed channel. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be reacting to a video, and I'll be interjecting at some of the key points because there's that additional layer, and then it completely comes full circle. A lot of you guys may even be watching the Red Pill channel, but this actually not Red Bull channel. It's like a group of different YouTubers and their channels. But like what this tells us, like this goes into like actual psychology, and through a mouse experiment, and it tells us it tells you a lot about the current state of society, and like you understand as I go through the video, and there's just like that extra layer that I'm going to add in just to bring things full circle. And right now, I'm pushing my the GPU's overclock a little bit faster. Um, and I'll be upgrading my computer's battery and my power cord because they're both worn out. I think the battery pretty much caused my power cord to work a little bit harder, completely destroying that too. Um, so once I get that in, I'm going to check if this new settings is also stable when I also run my games and stuff. Um, or do I still use the old settings? So I'm going to find out if my battery's been bottlenecking me this entire time um, in my adapter, just insufficient power. But these settings they work for like video recording and everything. Um, Again, it's a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo, but yeah. So just don't be surprised if you don't see me for a bit. Um, So if you don't see me, it's because of that. Just ordering new parts, replacement parts for my laptop, and hopefully I could push my laptop a lot harder. I mean, I'm still pushing it pretty hard, by the way, because I record in 4K. So with that being said, we'll get started, and hopefully this doesn't crash or anything, because these are like untested settings. I tested like for a few minutes, but like I never like did like a full video recording, like or even a mock recording. So there's that. So if you're seeing this video, that means I made it.
What if I told you that the blueprint for our social collapse was not written by an economist or a politician, but was instead discovered in a series of doomed utopias built from mice? And that within the crumbling walls of these rodent heavens, we can see the ghost of our own future. A future where the very concept of womanhood has been so warped by abundance that it threatens to extinguish the engine of humanity itself. This is not a metaphor. This is the terrifying, data-driven prophecy of the behavioral sink. And what it predicts about modern women will shatter everything you think you know about society, relationships, and the coming crisis of masculinity.
Before we begin, if you're serious about personal growth, not just the comforting lies, but the brutal, unvarnished truth, then you'll find real value in my ebook, The Black Book of Human Nature. It's a practical manual that breaks down the suppressed truths of human behavior, giving you the tools to finally understand yourself and the world more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment.
Don't raise dragons right off the bat. For new players, at the start of the game,
Yeah, I apologize
don't
about
rush
that.
to raise dragons.
In the 1960s, on a quiet plot of land at the National Institute of Mental Health, ethologist John B. Calhoun constructed a nightmare. But it was a nightmare disguised as a paradise. He called it Universe 25. It was a vast, multi-level enclosure, a rodent Hilton, designed to be a perfect world. It was sanitized, climate-controlled, and stocked with unlimited food, water, and nesting material. There were no predators. Disease was minimized. It was a utopia meant to study the effects of population density, but Calhoun had in fact created a machine to test the limits of the soul. The only thing missing was purpose. The experiment began with 4 pairs of healthy breeding mice placed into their new Eden. For the first 100 days, they explored, established territories, and began to breed. This was the phase Calhoun called the strive period. It was a time of joy, of growth, of building. The population doubled every 55 days. Imagine the optimism of those early days, the simple, profound joy of a creature finding its place in a world of plenty. This is the joy we were all promised. The post-war boom, the technological revolution, the infinite scroll of modern life. It is our own Universe 25. We have more food, more safety, more comfort, and more stimulation than any generation in human history. And like those mice, we were told this was the end goal. This was happiness. But in Universe 25, something began to rot. As the population surged towards its peak, the social fabric, unable to bear the weight of meaningless abundance, began to tear. Calhoun observed the emergence of what he called the beautiful ones. These were male mice who withdrew completely from the complexities of social life, including mating and fighting. They spent their days in a state of serene, vacant narcissism, obsessively grooming their own fur, which remained unblemished and perfect. They were healthy, they were fed, they were safe, and they were utterly, catastrophically empty. They had no scars, no stories, no drive. Their world had become so soft, so devoid of challenge, that the very thing that made them male, the urge to strive, to compete, to protect, to conquer, had atrophied into a quiet, self-directed madness. Can you not see these beautiful ones in our world today? The man lost in video games, in curated social media feeds, in the endless pursuit of self-optimization without a higher goal? He is groomed, he is comfortable, and he is spiritually dead.
Yeah, I'm going to add into this is like in our very society as well, there are actually laws in place that pretty much with the diversity, equity, inclusion, the DEI, it actually helped white women more than anything else, um, because they could claim to be a minority and still exercise the privilege that came with their white heritage. Um, like a lot of like the first world benefits, um, just kind of like the first world upbringing, basically, and at the same time still call them themselves a minority. Um, it, like some people might get turned off by this. Like, what do you mean by that? I mean, it's kind of just true. I mean, girls do tend to live life compared to men on easy mode. And on top of that, Europeans, especially with their history of colonization and their ability to create amass wealth and create societies where you have the sewerage and everything, just pretty much you have like a well irrigated system where you air conditioned type of system kind of society kind of growing up in that kind of environment. So there is that element of privilege and like that generational wealth, and that would apply more towards upper class people. So even though I'm not white, I would also have technically some of that. Um, though, yeah, like from the country I was born in, like you would have room ACs, but like not the full air conditioned house, and like our and the way we like address water, where you have to like pump things and like yeah. So yeah, there is a certain privilege in being in a first world country where you just flip the tap and the water flows, um, and not having a history of being enslaved. But then there's also indentured servants. So I guess there is that element of complexity there, but overwhelmingly though, there's like a lot of women who, if you really dug, if you went deep enough into their family history, you'd be like, hey, why are we giving them all these benefits? We're just giving it to them just because they're women. Um, and especially white women, especially like they really kind of, in a way, kind of just, and the system was designed so that way it would the system was essentially like a scam to just kind of uplift them, um, artificially in that kind of way. So it's essentially like disincentivizing men to like just actually produce, like to actually run the infrastructure and everything. Um, Even like delivering goods, for instance, this is all done by men. Like even like for packaging, like the trailers, there has to be someone to actually do that. Um, so even just something that we take for granted, something even as simple as that, and there's the more complex stuff like oil rigs, um, which are far more dangerous kind of physical jobs, and they pay really good because it's just that dangerous, um, and you have to be really physically fit to be able to do that. Um, yeah, and then there's also the part about like the way the family laws are written. Essentially, like which is like a scam. Like the woman, once she feels is no longer as attracted to you, or if you were the good guy that she settled for, eventually she'll be interested in pursuing the guy that she couldn't land, or some archetype of the guy that she couldn't land, and then that's when she gets to take away everything from you. Um, and like they're not thinking logically that hey, these kids are not going to look good if I'm going to try to stick the landing with the hot guy that I couldn't stick the landing with. And then it's also not logical in the sense that like their peak fertility years have passed. There's still that element of emotional validation they want to get from that guy that they couldn't get with. Um, and you know what I'm talking about. If you men, those of you as men who have gone through this, and the women who kind of have similar type of feelings, or maybe the person that they got with started out that way, but then the perception just changed, and now they're looking for a new guy who can kind of stimulate the emotions that way, and the system is designed to kind of just destroy you with alimony and child support, which most of that money, like a big portion of that money, just finances the state, um, and a lot of judges' retirement plans. It just finances all of that. Um, and then there's also like the way the consent laws are written. So teenagers, when they should be starting families, they're just having relationships and sex, but without producing children, which is kind of also alarming. So this is kind of where what this video is telling you. Like this is how I bring all of this full circle. And even like in Red Pill, they talk about the alpha and the beta side. We're gonna get to that, but again, I'm just bringing all of this stuff full circle.
He is a product of the sink. But the most devastating changes, the changes that hold the darkest mirror to our modern world, were observed in the females. As the environment became more crowded and social roles broke down, maternal instincts collapsed. Female mice, overwhelmed by constant, meaningless social interaction and the absence of any real threat or purpose, began to fail at the most fundamental biological level, motherhood. They could not build proper nests. They would move their litters constantly, abandoning them in the open, exposed and vulnerable. They would fail to retrieve pups that strayed. Infant mortality skyrocketed to as high as 96% in certain enclosures. The mothers were physically present, but psychologically absent. They were going through the motions of a script that had lost all meaning. The drive to nurture, to protect, to continue the species had been extinguished by the very paradise that was supposed to enable it. This is the shock that should reverberate through your very bones. This is not a story about mice. This is a diagnostic tool for our culture. We see the same collapse of the maternal instinct reflected in our own society. The rise of the child-free movement, not as a thoughtful choice, but as a visceral rejection of the burdens of motherhood. The statistical plunge in birth rates across the developed world, far below replacement level. The stories, the ones you've heard, whispered, or seen in your own life, of young mothers more attached to their phones than to the infants in their arms. This is not a moral failing of individual women. This is a systemic, environmental collapse of instinct, predicted with chilling accuracy in Universe 25.
Let's make this personal with a story about a man we'll call Alex. Alex is a high-value man. He did everything he was supposed to do. He built a successful career, he bought a beautiful home in a safe suburb, he provided a life of absolute security and comfort for his wife. This was their Universe 25. There were no predators, the food and water were unlimited, and yet he watched, bewildered, as his wife's spirit seemed to wither. She became agitated, restless. She filled the house with meaningless trinkets from online shopping sprees. She spent hours on social media, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen, a portrait of modern ennui. When they spoke of having children, she would recoil, not with fear, but with a vague disgust, as if the very idea was somehow beneath her. It was an affront to her curated, comfortable existence. She wasn't a bad person. She was a mouse in a utopia. The environment had stripped her of her purpose. The drive to build a family, to nurture a future, had been replaced by the drive to consume, to self-soothe, and to maintain a state of comfortable stagnation. Alex's story is not unique. It is the story of millions of men living in the behavioral sink, watching the women they love slowly succumb to a sickness they cannot name. The data backing this societal shift is not hidden, it is ignored because it is inconvenient. A 2018 study published in The Lancet projected that global fertility rates have nearly halved since 1950, with nearly half of all countries now below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. In South Korea, the fertility rate has plummeted to a world low of 0.72. This isn't just an economic statistic, it is a biological alarm bell. It is the sound of a species that has lost its will to continue.
The government is banning this $39 electric lighter next month, and this is your last shot to get the original high-powered version.
Historian Sir William Beveridge, architect of the UK's welfare state, envisioned a system that would slay the 5 giant evils of society: want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. He succeeded in large part, but he did not foresee that in slaying these giants, he would create a new, more insidious monster, the giant of meaninglessness. When the struggle for survival is removed, what is left to strive for? The mice of Universe 25 gave us the answer: nothing. And in that nothingness, social bonds, courtship rituals, and maternal instincts don't just weaken, they reverse, they pervert, they die.
This is the core of the behavioral sink. It is not about overcrowding in a physical sense, but the overcrowding of the psyche with meaningless stimuli and the simultaneous undercrowding of genuine, consequential challenges. The modern world, with its infinite scroll of social media, its endless buffet of cheap entertainment, and its safety net society, has created a psychological density that is crushing the female soul in a very specific way. It has created a world where a woman is bombarded with 1,000 options, 1,000 potential lives, 1,000 images of perfection, while being systematically shielded from any real consequence or hardship. The result is a paralysis of choice, a spiritual agoraphobia. Why commit to one man when the illusion of infinite choice is just a swipe away? Why endure the profound physical and emotional transformation of motherhood when your identity can remain forever that of a consumer, a girl boss, a curated image? The environment has become so safe that it is now the most dangerous place on earth for the human spirit. The nest is not being built because the environment no longer signals that a nest is necessary for survival. The sink has spoken, and its message is one of terminal comfort. But this is only the beginning. We have only diagnosed the disease. We have seen the collapse of the nest. But what about the fate of the males who try to build a nest in this world of chaos?
What about the violent outcast males that Calhoun called the probers? These were the mice that, rejected by a society that had lost all structure, turned to rampant, indiscriminate violence, including cannibalism, and what Calhoun termed a behavioral sink of pathological hypersexuality.
Yes, so within the red pill sphere, they talk about the alpha and the beta male, the alpha and the beta side of hypergamy. Um, this what he's about to show you now is going to kind of touch upon that. And by the end of this, you will also understand that this concept of the alpha and beta in the red pill is actually very, very unnatural. Um, there is an element of truth to like how women want the provisioning and then that spark, but it's very unnatural for that to be seen in two separate men who either have just only the spark but no provisioning qualities at all, or they have the provisioning qualities but they lack that spark. This is actually very, very unnatural because it's typically you either have both together or you have neither. And another thing too is like in the modern world, how people just have sex and oftentimes it doesn't lead to a relationship, or even forget even having kids. Like it doesn't even lead to a relationship, and oftentimes you have relationships but it doesn't lead to kids. This is actually very, very unnatural. And naturally, in the natural course of how we did things for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, even in prior civilizations way before Rome, is people would start off their relationship and they would have sex for the first time just right after they get married. That's when they would formally start off their relationship, and that's also when they would have sex for the first time and they would procreate just naturally, just like that. And people did tend to get married as soon as they were pubescent. There was like no rule like, oh, you have to hit the age of 18 and then you become legally adult. No. And technically speaking, your brain becomes hardwired at the age of 25. It reaches full maturity at the age of 35, and to reach the highest level of brain development, the cognitive development, like you build your worldview, and and then you fully like mature as a person. Like you become like you fully like become your own person essentially with the highest cognitive development right at your 60s. Um, which again, if you're a girl, by the time you're 60s, like you're done. If you're 35, you're really close to being done. And 25 is just like the longest you should wait before having a kid. Like ideally, you should, if you're a woman especially, you should be getting that done way before. And I get it if you're going to college, but you should be also doing this simultaneously as you're going to college and your career. You should not like focus on those teams, on those stuff at the expense of all of that, especially for female. Males, since we don't have that menopausal thing to worry about, we can actually delay that. And for the vast majority of men, it's actually better that they do, so that way they have more provisioning power. And then if they delay having relationships until like an older age, and maybe they might get with a younger girl, they're actually in a better position to not only maintain a relationship and provide, but they have that level of maturity by that point, um, to be able to like pick if this is the right girl or not. Um, and then there are some people who are more natural like me, like it really doesn't matter. I mean, it still kind of matters though, like 10 years from now, and if I keep doing what I'm doing and I get money, obviously I'll be in a different place. But from the perspective of being able to choose the right girl, that part, that's easy. I always got the girls. Most men are not like that. They have to become attractive enough for a girl to even want to pick them, to have genuine desire for them. Most guys don't even get to that point where a girl actually has genuine desire for them. Um, and then some people do learn how to create that proper dynamic, and there's some people like me who just, I mean, my life still isn't perfect. There is still some very shocking things that happened to me when I was little. Um, I did mention that in one of my videos, and I tried to boost that in an ad, and like they disapproved it. I'm like, this is like way too violent. Um, so my life isn't like sunshine and rainbows, but yeah, if you watch the rest of this, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about.
They were the monsters created by the Utopia. And I can tell you with chilling certainty, their human equivalents are emerging from the shadows of our own decaying social order. Now, we will descend into the darkest corners of Universe 25 to meet these probers. We will expose the terrifying link between the collapse of female instinct and the rise of the feral male. And we will uncover the one single escape route from the behavioral sink that Calhoun himself discovered. A path to reclaiming your purpose, your power, and your soul in a world that wants you docile, comfortable, and extinct.
If you have tried multiple
My
oral
apologies for that.
antidepressants,
We left off in the haunting silence of Universe 25, amidst the neglected nests and the vacant, grooming, beautiful ones. We saw how a paradise without purpose systematically extinguished the maternal instinct, creating a world where mothers no longer mothered, where the future was abandoned for the sterile comforts of the present. But nature abhors a vacuum, and the void left by the collapse of social order was not left empty. It was filled by something far darker, something far more violent and desperate. If the story of the females in the behavioral sink is one of quiet atrophy, a fading of the light, then the story of the males is one of explosive, chaotic decay. Calhoun observed the emergence of a class of male mice he termed the probers. These were not the passive, narcissistic, beautiful ones. These were the outcasts, the rejects of a society that had lost all its rules. Denied any place in the established, albeit crumbling, social hierarchy, and faced with females who were increasingly withdrawn and non-receptive, these males underwent a terrifying transformation. They became hyper-aggressive, patrolling the edges of the utopia in a state of constant, frantic agitation. They were indiscriminate in their violence, attacking other males, females, and juveniles with equal ferocity. Their sexual behavior became pathological. They were incapable of the complex courtship rituals that had once defined their species. Instead, they became probers, attempting to mount any other mouse without regard for sex, age, or consent. This was not mating. It was a frantic, dysfunctional spasm, a grotesque parody of reproduction driven by a biological drive utterly severed from its social purpose. They were in every
Yes. And a lot of the stuff that you also see in the porn is also um, is also a grotesque parody, like a very gross mockery of actual sex that people do. It's essentially like a mockery, like giving a middle finger to like how people naturally have healthy sexual relations. And I'm not saying that some people might not engage in some of the rough behavior, but even then, the level of extremity, and especially like the dynamic, like in the real world, people don't become seduced like that, especially not women. Like you'll see, like um, in those type of videos where a guy just shows off his junk, and then the girl just suddenly just like kind of like a lollipop just wants to do stuff like that. Like this is not how most people like operate. This is like a very small percentage of people who have something really wrong with them. So people in the women in the cluster B might be more willing to do stuff like that. Um, so on the cluster B personality disorders, but like and normal people just don't do that. Um, So that's also a big part of it too. Um, so a lot of what you see in those videos, that's like that's not how like that's not natural.
Sense, feral. They were the monsters that Utopia built. Now, close your eyes for a moment and step out of the mouse universe and into our own. Look at the landscape of modern male dysfunction. You do not have to look far to see the human probers emerging from the digital and physical shadows of our own behavioral sink. Consider the rise of the involuntary celibate community. These are men, often young, who are so utterly rejected by a social structure they cannot navigate that their despair curdles into a venomous rage. Their online forums are digital territories of the feral, filled with a lexicon of hatred and a mythology of their own victimhood. They are the probers, patrolling the edges of.
So this would be the incel and the MGTOW community. Again, part of this is for you guys, so that way you can kind of reclaim what you lost, and which you deep down know that, hey, this is not the way to do things. So by the end of this video, you'll get the answer of like how you can reclaim. And I'm also going to add one more layer to this towards the end of the video where it gives you the answer. I'm going to add another layer to that because there is a necessity for social reform, obviously. But again, you have to wait till the end of the video where I also add that last bit of commentary, and bingo, that comes full circle. But you have to watch the full video and just not just leave it out open like that. Like, do not click out yet.
Of a society that has no use for them, their sexual frustration morphing into a desire for violence. Their aggression is not the disciplined strength of a warrior. It is the chaotic lashing out of a creature that has been stripped of all purpose and dignity.
It's so easy to become a podcaster with Riverside. You just need a concept and a way to record it.
But the probers are not only found in these dark digital corners. They are the school shooters whose manifestos often echo this same sense of profound social and sexual rejection. They are the perpetrators of random, senseless acts of violence on city streets, a symptom of a psyche that has snapped under the weight of meaningless abundance. The connection is not superficial, it is causal. When you create a world that denies young men a clear path to proving their worth, when you dismantle the rites of passage that once channeled their aggressive instincts into productive roles as protectors and providers, that energy does not simply vanish. It simmers, it festers, and it eventually explodes. The prober is not born, he is manufactured by a society that offers him everything he wants and nothing that he needs. The shock of this realization should be a physical blow. The very systems we built for safety and equality have, through a series of unintended consequences, created the conditions for this feral male to emerge. Think of the boy raised in a world where every sport has a participation trophy, where every academic setback is smoothed over, where conflict is pathologized and medicated away. He is taught that aggression is inherently evil, that competition is toxic. He is placed in a padded cell of a world. Then he is thrust into the sexual marketplace, a realm that remains one of the most brutally competitive and Darwinian landscapes in human existence. He is utterly unequipped. He has no scars, no resilience, no understanding of how to face rejection and channel it into self-improvement. He is a mouse raised in a corner of Universe 25 that was too safe. And when he is finally forced to interact with the wider colony, he either retreats into the catatonia of the beautiful one, the video game addict, the desire-sick NEET, or he transforms into the prober, his suppressed aggression erupting in a toxic, directionless rage. This is the great betrayal of modern masculinity. We were disarmed, and then we were shamed for not having the tools to fight. But the story grows even more complex and even more terrifying when we examine the twisted symbiosis that developed between the female and the prober in Universe 25. Calhoun noted a bizarre and unsettling phenomenon. As the normal males became increasingly passive and the probers increasingly violent, a strange new dynamic emerged. Some of the non-receptive females who had themselves abandoned their maternal roles began to exhibit a kind of reckless aggression themselves. They would wander into the territories of the probers, seemingly indifferent to the danger. In this chaos, a perverse form of selection began to take place. The passive, beautiful ones were entirely selected against. They bred not at all. But the violent probers, in their frantic assaults, occasionally succeeded in impregnating the few remaining receptive females. The environment was now selecting for violence and pathology. The genes for sociability, for complex courtship, for nurturing were being systematically scrubbed from the population. The sink was not just breaking society, it was actively re-engineering the mouse to be perfectly adapted for a hellscape.
Translate this to the human realm, and you will see a pattern that should chill you to your core. We see a version of this in the modern dating market.
So essentially what he's saying, and this is actually kind of true, so like whenever you create like a perfect utopia, especially when there's a concentration of violence, um, oftentimes women who come from perfect utopias, they will select out the males who are like the most aggressive. Um, so what this ends up doing is you start spreading genetics that code for that makes someone perfectly adapted for a violent world. Warrior genes. All human beings have like around 6, 7, or 8 out of the 15 warrior genes. Um, so having a higher concentration of these type of genes, you create a population of people that are just generally more aggressive. And this also so any area where there's a concentration of violence, so any kind of dysfunctional area, or any kind of violence that results as a result of a utopia where people are rejected and then they start to unleash their worst instincts, there are certain genes that are passed down. And sometimes you don't even need the genes. Sometimes it's just the epigenetics. So like the epigenetics pretty much tells you what genes need to be turned on, turned off. Um, those epigenetic markers. So even though the actual DNA itself doesn't change, but those markers change and they get passed down, which actually changes everything, actually. And you end up breeding more psychopaths. Well, they start off subclinical. They only become full psychopaths, actually, if they're abused before the age of 5 and they're not treated before the age of 5. So, and yeah, you're essentially selecting for people who are extremely pathological as well. And we're starting to see that in Western culture, especially, that only the most pathological people are the ones who are having the most sex, the most chances of passing on their DNA. And sure, there's things like birth control and like condoms that can kind of circumvent that. But especially the psychopaths, they will typically have unprotected sex, and they might even do things without even consideration for consent and among other things. Um, yeah, and they breed like yeah, people like that, especially the full blown psychopaths, they will breed like animals, like like pigs and like essentially like litters of humans that they have impregnated. Um, that's yeah. Again, the people who have the normal people who have a mix of both the warrior genes and some of the uh, traits for sociability, they're completely being selected against, or they're like reproducing like in a very minimal amount, with birth rates collapsing. Because with modern technology, um, with birth control and condoms, so like a lot of the bad boys that would have otherwise impregnated the girl end up not impregnating her, and then they still end up reproducing with the good guy, but they still end up having fewer kids. Um, and eventually we'll come to a point where only the bad guys are the ones who are having kids. Eventually. So we're kind of just transitioning into that kind of a hellscape. Um, but yeah, this is something really to take into consideration. I mean, there's some normal people who will start to behave in a more pathological manner. These people are what you would call sociopaths, which is very different from psychopaths. Sociopaths, they're manufactured when they're rejected by society, or if they've been through early childhood trauma. And this usually happens right around the age of 8 is when the sociopathy starts to form, because the orbital cortex, a part of the brain that's, and the medial cortex, the orbital cortex is the part that's responsible for understanding morality, the medial cortex for that emotional world, and the amygdala, they're more or less kind of developed sufficiently at that point. So even if the person has the genetics for psychopathy, that person would more likely than not, the person would not become a full-blown psychopath. That person would become subclinical, and if the subclinical psychopath is like abused um, after the age of 5, they might show aggressive behavior, but not. It will not be the same as the full-blown ones that are completely out of control, which either end up in jail or they do some very heavy-hitting level crimes, like if they're not stopped, and it's like very compulsive too, um, and like those regions just don't develop at all. Um, so it's just like complete reptilian. They just like compulsively just go around just killing people, and just for fun too, killing, raping people, raping people, and different kinds of pedophilia. Oh yeah, so those are what the full blown ones do. Subclinical ones, they would be a little bit more, become more a little bit more aggressive, and then the normal people, and especially the normal, there are people who have a high number of warrior genes, but they would not, uh, they would still have a basic understanding of morality, even if they were abused early on, um, because they just don't have that correct combination of genes that would switch off the portions of the brain like that, and then before the age of 5, completely just wreck their mind in that way. So so those would be people who would become sociopaths, and it would be with it would also be with a combination of PTSD. Uh, so whenever there's violence, you either have full-blown psychopaths or the subclinical psychopaths that are more aggressive, or you have sociopaths, or you have sociopaths with PTSD, um, or you have just people with PTSD and they just kind of just withdraw, and then you just have people just that just straight up just withdraw. Um, and again, sociopaths, they're like not genetically wired for psychopathy, and they can still relate to people like a normal person when they're not like insanely mad and angry, because that's what's stopping them. But they have the basic level of ability to like connect with people normally. Um, think for instance Adolf Hitler, he could still get close and tight with people. This doesn't happen with people who are psychopaths or subclinical psychopaths. um, because because psychopaths and subclinical psychopaths, those parts of those brains, their brains, are switched off, so they don't really connect with people in that automatic fashion, the way a normal person can, the way a sociopath can, or someone with PTSD could. They just those parts of their brain is just like low activity, and it has to be triggered consciously for them to even be able to do that. But again, what this comes down to is like you end up creating a society that ends up selecting for the most pathological people, and that's not good.
Particularly in the phenomenon of the bad boy. This is not the old-fashioned trope of the rebellious teen. This is something darker. In a world saturated with nice guys, the human equivalent of the beautiful ones, who are safe, predictable, and emotionally sterile.
Yes, and these are the people that the woman friend zone, by the way. So that nice guy, that all that red pill talk, he's tying that in right here.
A subset of women, driven by a deep, often unconscious biological imperative for stimulation and strong genetics, can find themselves drawn to the raw, untamed energy of the prober. The prober, for all his dysfunction, feels. He is intense. He is dangerous. He represents a jolt of authenticity in a world of curated, sanitized fakeness. This is not a rational choice. It is an instinctual pull towards the only source of high-stakes emotion left in the behavioral sink. We see this in the endless cycles women find themselves in with chaotic, unreliable, even abusive partners. We see it glorified in popular culture, in the brooding, violent anti-heroes of film and television who are portrayed as more authentic than the stable, dependable man. This is the perverse selection of our own Universe 25. The environment, by making life so soft and predictable, has created a situation where the only thing that can pierce the numbness is chaos. The stable provider, the man who builds and protects, is seen as boring, as a relic. The prober, for all his destructiveness, is at least alive. And in a dying world, that spark of feral life can be mistaken for a flame.
Excuse me, you're reading wrong. Put these on. Show me your book. I'm gonna take a picture of it.
Yeah, I apologize
Now
for
it's
that.
Let me tell you a story about a woman named Chloe. Chloe grew up in a pristine suburban Universe 25. She went to a good school, got a degree, landed a comfortable corporate job. She dated men who were, by all accounts, perfect on paper. They had good jobs, they were polite, they remembered her birthday. And she was bored to the point of tears. She described it as a feeling of being slowly suffocated by velvet. Then she met Jake. Jake was a storm in human form. He was an aspiring musician, unpredictable, emotionally volatile, and financially reckless. He would show up at her apartment at 2 a.m., full of wild stories and passionate intensity. He forgot her birthday, but he once drove through the night just to see her for an hour. The relationship was a roller coaster of ecstatic highs and devastating lows. Her friends, the mice in her part of the Utopia, warned her. They told her he was toxic, a prober. But to Chloe, he was the only real thing in her plastic world. The stable, reliable men in her life felt like ghosts. Jake, for all his flaws, felt vibrantly, dangerously alive. He was the shock to her system that her comfortable life had deprived her of. She was not stupid. She was responding to the perverse incentives of the behavioral sink. Her biology was craving a challenge, intensity, that her environment had otherwise eliminated. She, like the mice wandering into the prober's territory, was seeking a spark in the gathering gloom.
This is the trap. This is the devil's bargain of Universe 25. The female's search for a spark leads her to the prober, whose chaos ultimately destroys her. The good man, the potential builder, is left isolated and powerless, either retreating into his own narcissistic bubble or, in the worst cases, becoming a prober himself out of sheer desperation and rage. It is a death spiral. A society in this stage of the behavioral sink is not just declining, it is actively committing suicide, with each gender playing a role in the other's destruction. The data on this is stark. Look at the rise of deaths of despair, suicide, drug overdose, and alcoholism, primarily among men without college degrees, men who have been structurally excluded from the provider role. They are the casualties of this collapse. A 2015 study by economists Ann Case and Angus Deaton found that mortality rates for white, non-Hispanic Americans in midlife had reversed decades of decline and begun to rise, driven by these very causes. These are not just statistics. They
Again, I'm also going to drive home the point. Another thing that deprives men of that provider and caretaking role is especially the horrible marriage laws, horrible marriage divorce laws, and even the consent laws, which are just terrible. Because the teenage years where you're having sex, you could have had a child during that point, but you didn't. Catch my drip? And that's asinine. That's crazy talk. And I don't care if you unsub from my channel. Oh no, people are too young to have kids. Like, shut the F up. God. But there's nothing natural about people waiting that long after they've become pubescent to have kids. There's nothing natural about that at all. What's natural is as soon as those biological instincts start to kick in, and as soon as those hormones start to surge, what parents would typically do is they would typically get you set up with someone. And I'm not advocating for like arranged where you like don't even know that other person previously. I prefer it being like more natural, like where you guys at least know each other and there's like some kind of a prior chemistry before you guys be like, hey, let's test this out and just get married and formally start a relationship that way and have kids. That's like the traditional, true, rock solid traditional way of doing things. And in my channel, I do also talk about a certain cluster of men, especially those who have high testosterone, highly masculine. Some men who might have just a higher amount of warrior genes. Like for them, they might have the option of having multiple relationships. And truth be told, there's always going to be crime. There's always going to be people getting mugged and killed. There's always going to, at some level, be war. And even if there's not war, there's going to be famine and disease, which will wipe out hordes upon hordes of people. So it actually makes sense to give men that, well, people in general, just men that power where they can have multiple relationships at once. And men like that, those who can actually handle that psychologically and financially, like you will see they won't treat their girl any different than if they were just exclusive with her. And what studies have found is when you put the woman on the pedestal, make her your world, it declines or reduces your masculinity. It changes up your behavior in ways that actually shoots you in the foot because you're not going as far in life as you should. You end up kind of going the reverse direction. And women can feel that, and even though they can't name it, they start to lose desire, and this starts to destroy the relationship by destroying that dynamic. And that's where cheating and infidelity and exit, separation, divorce, all that starts to happen. So that's one of those type of things you need to keep in mind. Like, the laws are effed, and I actually created a legal proposal to un-F the law. Yeah.
are the beautiful ones and the probers, dying in the real world. So, is there any hope? Did John B. Calhoun, in his meticulous chronicle of our doom, leave us any key to escape the cage? He did. But it is not a simple fix. It is not a government program or a new app. It is a philosophical and personal nuclear option. Towards the end of the Universe 25 experiment, when the population was in irreversible decline, Calhoun and his team attempted a series of interventions. They tried to introduce new, healthy mice into the dying colony. The results were telling. The healthy mice raised in a normal world could not integrate. They were either terrorized by the probers or ignored by the catatonic beautiful ones. They became just as pathological as the rest. The sink had claimed them. But there was one exception. In a separate experiment, Calhoun created a different environment. He still provided unlimited resources, but he introduced a critical element. He made the environment challenging. He created a universe that required problem-solving, effort, and exploration to access the food and water. It was not a utopia of effortless abundance. It was a world that demanded competence. And in this environment, the behavioral sink did not occur. The mice thrived. They built stable social structures. They raised their young. They avoided the descent into pathology. The lesson was not that struggle is bad. The lesson was that struggle is essential. The key to escaping the behavioral sink is not to make life harder in a punitive sense, but to reintroduce the anti-fragile element of voluntary struggle. To build a life that requires you to be strong, to be competent, to be dangerous in your capability, not in your rage.
This is your call to action. This is the path to inspiration. The world wants you to be a beautiful one. It wants you docile, consuming, and self-obsessed. It offers you a padded cell and calls it safety. You must reject it. You must consciously, deliberately build your own Universe 26, a world of challenge and purpose.
Welcome to the Running Man. Survive 30 days. You win $1 billion.
Yeah, I apologize about that.
I'm still here.
The Running Man. Only theaters November 14th. Tickets on sale now.
This means physical challenge. It means lifting heavy weights, running long distances, mastering a martial art. Forge your body into something capable and resilient. It means intellectual challenge. Read the great, difficult books of philosophy and history. Learn a complex skill, not for a certificate, but for the mastery itself. It means emotional and spiritual challenge. Seek out rejection. Have the difficult conversations. Embrace the pain of failure as the price of growth. Most importantly, it means building a mission that is bigger than your own comfort. The male in Universe 25 went mad because his role as provider and protector was rendered obsolete. You must make it obsolete again. Find something to build, to protect, to lead. Your mission is your antidote to the sink. For the man listening to this, feeling the pull of the beautiful one's catatonia or the
Okay, so this is where it kind of ties together. So this is like towards the ending. And there's like only like, yeah, a little bit less than a minute left before this video, before this original video concludes. So yes, the psychological side of this, the antidote to this is you need to have like some kind of a purpose. Like going your separate way, like it's understandable, but there has to be like whatever you end up doing, it cannot come from it cannot come from a place of what's the word for it? It cannot come from a place of weakness. It cannot come from a place of pain. It has to come, whatever you do and whatever decision you make, it has to come from a place of strength. Not weakness or pain, not from thirst, not from like dissatisfaction of unmet needs. It has to come from that place of strength. Um, so for different people, this will be different things. Maybe you're good at like chopping wood. Maybe you're just really good at moving boxes. Like it doesn't matter. It just has to be something in life. And better yet, if you're not sure, you could actually help us out by, because this is like, I'm not doing this YouTube channel to become famous. This is actually like a lobbying effort. And here's the thing, I'm not working under an organization, and I'm like not working under some kind of business, because most lobbyists, they work under some kind of business which funds them, gives them all that money up front, and then they talk with the politicians, the congressmen, and the senators, and then they work with their staffers to draft up bills and make certain kinds of deals and all of that. I don't have that kind of a funding. So I get that funding from you guys. So big part of the reason why I sell that book is it works twofold. I get the cash, obviously, but there's this other part. So if you yourself are part of a movement, or if you're thinking of starting up a movement, trust me, my book will come in handy. Even if there are things in there that you don't agree with, like you can at least appreciate that there's an underlying reasoning behind why I thought the way I did. Like you can at least appreciate that. And two, you can just scrap those pieces out, and just, as much as I hate it, like the idea of like someone like vandalizing my own book. I mean, technically it's your book now since you bought it, but like you can just kind of blot out that portion, or just scratch it out, or just rip it out. I don't really care. But you, no matter what, even if you find things in there that you don't agree with, it is still a very useful book. So, and third, even if you're not starting up your own movement or are part of a movement, you can still use this book and call your representative or your state senate or your senator, and you can just go up to their office really, and just kind of just like talk with their staffers. Like if you have enough people doing that, it'll kind of force them, because you can't really meet the actual representative or the senator in person most of the times. They will only typically meet with lobbyists and businesses and their business leaders. But if you have enough ordinary people starting to come out, it'll kind of force them out of what they typically do, and kind of force them out to meet the people and be like, and the people will be showing up, hey, yes, this is the kind of law we want. Because here's the thing, what happens is, like with uprisings and like social revolutions, you might be able to successfully depose someone, you could successfully appoint a new person in, but here's the thing, the people are not writing the new rules. The person that they appoint is the one who's writing the rules, and that person has the leverage. Businesses have the leverage, because the very first thing that will happen is a business will start to get into that person and be like, oh, we can offer you this person, and like that person is gonna cave, like especially if that person came from a humble beginning. Oh, that person's definitely going to cave, because that person will not be able to make it on his or her own without some kind of backing. So, with the two-party system, the Republican and the Democrat, there's a reason why candidates, they have to either run either as a Democrat or Republican, or otherwise, because they can't. The system is set up that you cannot make it on your own without either aligning yourself with one or the other. Even someone like Donald Trump had to, despite his business background, he had to pick which party he wanted to run as. And a lot of you guys didn't know, he used to be a Democrat. So he actually used to be good pals with Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and they were all pals with Mr. Epstein. Um, yeah, like these people were friends not too long ago. Um, yeah. But when the people have like their own system there, and they're like adamant, no, we want the law like this, that actually gives you that kind of leverage that typically businesses have. So it's no longer, it won't be just businesses who are just writing the laws that they want, writing laws that are favorable to them. Now, because you to an extent have to kind of play their game, so you do, and now you as the people are the one calling the shots. But yeah, there's has to be enough people, and obviously you can't get 100% of the people to engage, like not even that, like around like 5-10% of the population, 1-5-10% of the population. If we can even get even that, that's going to really move the power dynamics. Where people are saying, hey, we want the laws to be written like this. Like this. Bingo. And I'm going to let him finish up what he's saying, and then that will be the end of the video. Because if you can say, if you can put yourself in that kind of a position, now for the first time, the politicians, they're like not being controlled by the businesses and listening only to them. Now it's the people who get exactly what their legal agenda that they want through. So, because now it's not just an uprising or a revolution, now you actually translate that over into the policies that the general populace wants. But usually ends up happening is that translation doesn't happen. They depose one or another person, and because we live in a republic, that deposition happens through someone just getting voted out. But as soon as a new person comes in, it's the same bullshit all over again. So you break that cycle, and you break that cycle by doing this. Because for the first time, it will be that translation into the actual policy that benefits the people. That translation will happen, instead of just like these movements that at most get someone voted out, but other than that, it's just it's basically a failure, which ends up basically being nothing. So we don't want that. And bingo.
Prober's rage, know this. The way out is through the voluntary embrace of hardship. You must become the sovereign man, the mouse who, placed in the Utopia, chooses to build his nest in the most challenging part of the enclosure, who seeks out the resistance that will keep him sharp and whole. You must cultivate a strength that is not for domination, but for creation and protection. This is how you make yourself immune to the spiritual decay that is consuming the world. This is how you become a beacon, not a victim. The sink is coming for everyone. Will you be one of its casualties? Or will you be one of the few who remembers how to build a nest in the storm?
This video was created by AI.
No expensive cameras or...
Yep. So that about sums it up. And hopefully you enjoy the video if you've watched till the very end. And yeah, so that psychological part, that's very important. Get in shape. If you're female, also get in shape. Your babies will thank you for it. It actually helps their genetics and everything. They'll be more fit. Like, even if they don't exercise, they'll be more fit than if you weren't in shape and then they exercise and they still can't beat the version of themselves that would have been conceived had you exercised, and then they're not really exercising as much. It changes the epigenetics, so which is huge. Yeah, so the psychological and the physical part. So the psychological have a purpose. Physical part get in shape. And then there's the legal part is where you help us out so we can kind of rewrite the laws in such a way that people are able to fulfill their traditional roles once again instead of the government just, you know, essentially blocking people from being able to do that. So, with that being said, I'll see you on the next one.